Okay, today is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2004. We're at the Saratoga Military Museum in Saratoga Springs. We're doing an interview with Kevin Patrick Lyons. Kevin, please give us your date of birth and where you were born and raised.
I was born November 18th, 1963. I was born and raised in Schenectady, New York.
Okay, and whereabouts did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from Mount Pleasant High School in 1981.
And did you go on to college from there?
No, I entered the service in that year, 1981, in August the 4th, straight into the Army.
Okay, and whereabouts did you go for your basic training?
I went to basic training, it was OSIT at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It was a basic training, and then I became a cannon crewman.
Could you explain what that is?
A cannon crewman is an artilleryman. My basic duties at first were to load the artillery piece, which was at first on a M102 Deuce howitzer, which is a 105mm howitzer. Then I worked my way up to the assistant gunner, and then finally the gunner.
Okay, and how long did you spend there?
I was at Fort Bragg. That was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was in Bravo 1st at 320th for 2 years. And then from there, I came down on orders to go to Germany. And I went to Germany. I was with the Bravo 26 Field Artillery. And my basic jobs there, I started out as a gunner on a M109 howitzer, which is a mechanized howitzer. And then from there, I moved on to Special Weapons Section. We dealt with the nuclear weapons. And that was in Hanau, Germany.
Okay. And how long were you there for?
I was there for 2 years. And I stayed there for 2 years, and at that time I decided that the Army wasn't for me, and I'd gotten out, and I came back home to Schenectady. 5 short months later, well actually it's probably a little bit less than that, August, September, October, November, December, yeah. 6 months later I enlisted back in the Army.
Okay, and what made you decide to come back in?
I had gotten married in Germany. My wife is German, and jobs were a little bit tough. And not only that, but then she came home one day and told me that we were going to have a baby. And jobs not only were tough, but didn't have any insurance. And so I went back and talked to the recruiter and told him, hey, you know, I'd like to go in the Army. And I didn't say go back in the Army, so he was trying to sell me on everything. And I told him, hey, I was in before, I'd like to just go back in. And that's what happened. I went back in January.
Did you keep your former MOS?
I got out as the cannon crewman, and when they told me that I was going to go back in, they had said, well, you can go to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I said, I didn't want to go there. And so they said I had to change my job, and I became a mechanic, a Bradley fighting vehicle mechanic. And I work on everything from the Bradley fighting vehicle to Jeeps to trucks, now everything like the Humvee, the new Humvee, and all the new vehicles and everything, to include M1 tanks I've worked on since I came back in.
Okay, and at that point, what was your rank?
My rank at that point was a specialist. I ETS'd, I got out as a specialist, and actually as a corporal, and then I went back in as a specialist. And I went back in, I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for training, my advanced individual training to be a mechanic. And then from there I went to Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was in the 110 Mechanized Infantry in the 4th Infantry Division.
And how long did you spend there?
It was probably 16 months. It was about 16 months. I was there probably 6 months, came down on orders to go to Korea. So it was a very short stay there. When I went there, I was unaccompanied. My wife and son went to Germany, and I went to Korea. Went to the 1st of the 5th Mechanized Infantry Unit, which was part of the 2nd ID, 2nd Infantry Division.
And how long were you in Korea for?
1 year.
1 year.
1 year, 365 days, and that was enough. I did, while I was there, everyone had to do a tour up on the DMZ, and that was usually a 90-day tour, which was at Warrior Base. Lucky or unlucky for me, while I was there, the Olympics started, so I then had to go up there a second time before I left because we went early. So I spent 2 tours up on the DMZ.
Any incidents up there?
There were minor incidents. There were some incursions by the North Koreans, but nothing major. I mean, nothing to speak of. You know, guys would talk about patrols, and I was a mechanic, but they took a mechanic with them out on the patrols. They called it a MACE patrol, which is the mobile it was like a multiple anti-incursion patrol, and they went in Humvees, and you just kind of ran along the DMZ, and it's pretty much it. But you just get this, every time you got close to where the line was, it's just like this, you get this feeling. It was like an eerie feeling. I don't know what it was, but it was just there. It was always there. It was kind of strange.
What was the relationship with the civilians like? Were they friendly or?
So the civilians there, I was in Camp House, which is in a town called Bongochan, and the civilians were friendly. I mean, they were really friendly. I mean, you know, most of their livelihood was from the GIs that were close to the town, so it was a friendly thing. They'd have demonstrations, but those were mostly in Seoul, and we were 45 minutes to an hour away from Seoul. And most of the time that wasn't even against Americans, it was uprisings between taxi drivers against the government for pay and stuff, but that was about it.
At that point, had you attended any NCO schools?
I'd been to the Primary Leadership and Development course, which is the first school for an NCO, and I actually attended that at Fort Carson before I had left, and I'd become a sergeant just prior to leaving, so that's when I'd become a sergeant. When I got to Korea, I worked for a staff sergeant, and I was in the motor pool, and he had left, and no one came in, so I became the motor sergeant. That was the first time I'd actually taken that supervisory position, and then I'd never held anything less than that the entire time I'd been in. It was probably I'd had about five and a half years in, and then I'd never taken a step back or down, and most of those were E7 positions as an E5, and that's all I've ever held pretty much, that or an E6 position.
And how long did it take from making E5 to E6?
That was a long one. 1987 is when I was promoted to E5, and I did not make E6 until 1992. It was a whole, you waited on points. You go to the board. 1987 is when I'd gotten promoted. In 1988, I was actually attended the board for E6, and I waited till 1992 to get promoted. I actually went to BNOC prior to being promoted, which was the next one, the Basic Non-Commissioned Officers course.
Whereabouts was that?
That was attended at Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was a 6-month-long school. It's about the longest non-commissioned officers course in the Army for a mechanic.
Was it a tough course?
It was a very tough course. It was a lot. The physical part of it, it was pretty tough. You know, that the instructors, you're there for 6 months. They want to keep you in shape, and then what you learned everything about the Bradley fighting vehicle inside and out. I was a hull mechanic, so I worked on basically the hull, the automotive, the engine, the suspension, and then they taught you everything about the turret, which is all electrical. And it was a lot to learn. You learned everything from the gun system, how it works, to how the motors work, and if something went wrong with the traversing system, how you had to fix it. So it was pretty intense. That was probably a good 3 months of the course was the turret portion.
Okay. And once you graduated from that was when you went to Korea?
Well, no, that was just after I'd gone from Korea straight to Germany.
Okay.
I volunteered to do that. My wife was in Germany. That's where they went, and I liked Germany the first time, so I figured I'd give it a chance again. And I actually left Korea, went to Germany, and I got to Stuttgart. There's a caserne called Panzer Kaserne. It's actually in Bublingen, a little town, and we stayed there. And that's where I gone all the way back to Fort Knox, Kentucky for 6 months while I was there. And my wife and son again stayed in Germany while I was there. So that was probably a total of 18 months I was away in a 2-year period.
Okay.
I assumed another duty position that was, they called them maintenance team chiefs there, and it was an E7 position. And it was pretty much the same job. You make sure that all the Bradleys are running correctly, and you make sure all the wheel vehicles are running correctly, and it's supervised anywhere from 10 to 14 people on a daily basis.
Okay, and you were promoted to E7 at that point?
No, I stayed there. It was the next unit because I stayed in Germany. That was 3 years had passed. So it was from 1988 till 1992. I'd gone to my second unit in Germany, which was in Erlangen, Germany, which was the 2nd Battalion, 6th Infantry. In Stuttgart, in the Panzer Kaserne, I was in the 3rd of the 34th Armor, and it was a tank unit. And then when I went from there, I went to Erlangen, which was an infantry unit, which was part of the 1st AD, it was 1st of the 30th Infantry, Rock of the Marne. And then they redesignated when they went to the 3rd ID, and we became the, from 3rd ID to 1 AD, and we became 2-6 Infantry. And their motto is regulars by God. And I stayed there, and that's where I got promoted to Staff Sergeant. It was in December, very cold day. And tradition is they take and fill up a trash can with water, and they put, you know, the lower guys get to do whatever they want that day, so they fill up the trash can, and they'd even gone so far as to get ice from the dining facility and put it in there. These are all the guys that work for me, so it was their chance to get a very cold day.
Okay, and what was your next tour?
My next tour, I actually stayed in Germany again, and I went and I was in an OPFOR unit. I went to Hohenfels, Germany. They called it the CMTC, the Combat Maneuver Training Center. And we were there to help train regular units on how to go against the Russians. And so we were the opposing forces. That was the 1st of the 4th Infantry Mechanized. And our job on a daily basis was to provide opposing forces for them and to go against them in little battle scenarios. And I was in charge of the motor pool again. It was another first class job, and this time I was a staff sergeant. And we worked on a daily basis fixing all the way up to like a battalion's worth of equipment in our one company. Because the opposing forces, although we were one battalion, we had the equipment equivalent to a brigade. And we had to maintain that on a daily basis. It was fun. I had there was a couple different jobs there. They had what we called civilians on the battlefield. It was to train soldiers how to deal with civilians, whether it be townspeople, even back then terrorists, and people who were against them. So a couple times I got to service. They took the staff sergeants, and we went and served as mayors of the towns. So we actually lived out there for a 2-week period. We caused problems. Sometimes we asked for food, and one time we even went as far as to get in it was a VW van, which they gave us. They were painted like civilian cars, and we went into one of their operations centers, right into the center of their perimeter, and I was walking around in their operations center just talking. I spoke German, and so I'm just talking German, and they're trying to figure out what I'm saying, and I would just speak German, and so it kind of just messed them all up, and finally they had to call for an interpreter and all this stuff. So it was a fun experience. It made me learn living in those towns is probably pretty much what, like, refugees and townspeople in places that I've gone since then, how they feel and what they're treated like sometimes. Good sometimes, bad other times.
What year was that?
That was 96 and 97, all the way up until 98. Well, actually 96, 97. From there, I came down on orders to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is where I had the 2 assignments where I didn't work actually in my job as a mechanic. I became a service school instructor training mechanics, and that was in the Alpha Company 181 Armor at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I started off, I trained the Bradley turret, how to work on the turret. I did the same. I taught those soldiers the same thing that they had taught me years before. It was a fun job. I enjoyed it, working with the young soldiers, 17, 18, 19 years old. Enjoyed it. It was great teaching them how to do things. You don't get to teach them everything. They learn most of it when they go to their unit, but it was enjoyable. Was there, and we had a lot of civilian instructors, so the military instructors sometimes didn't get to instruct. The civilian instructors had to teach first because somebody's paying them big money, so hey, they could have me cut the grass or do whatever. As an E6, that was an experience in itself. Here I am, and I'm an E6, and say, you got to go cut the grass today. I'm used to telling privates to do it, and here I am doing it. But it became something, and then became, after a while, for something to do, we'd pretty much fight each other for who was going to drive the riding lawnmower. So you have 2 E6s out there going toe to toe. Hey, I'm going to cut it today. No, you did it yesterday. We cut the grass 2 or 3 times a week. It was crazy. From that, I put in because instructor duty was kind of slow, so I volunteered to become a drill sergeant. I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for my training, and I know why they call it Fort Lost in the Woods. There's nothing else there. And there's a whole bunch of hills that you run, and they run you to death out there. Probably the closest to basic training I had come, and that was I think it was late '97 when I attended that.
Was that worse than PLDC? Or?
It was worse than PLDC. It was worse than BNOC. It was the toughest school I'd ever gone to. It was the only military school I'd gone to that was a closed book test. All the rest of them are open book. If you can find it in the book, you can pass the test. Well, this one was all closed book. So it was tough. And you had to learn modules. There were 170 some modules. Drill and ceremony, how to salute, how to align a squad, how to do stack arms, and you had to learn all those verbatim. And you could not get one word out of place. That was tough. In fact, kind of sitting here today reminds me of a point. If you got a no-go, if you failed to do a certain portion, you had to, the first time you redid it. The third time you had to go in front of the video camera, and that was so they could show you what you did wrong, but you're nervous anyway because you missed a module, and you're nervous because now there's this camera sitting in front of you and it's big light on it, and I'm like, oh, this sucks. But I got through it, and it was a great experience.
Was there a lot of people that didn't make it or dropped out?
There were a lot of people that just said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. There was a couple Rangers, these like all these high-speed Rangers, like, I'm not doing this. This is crazy. I'm not putting up with this, and they left. There was about 5 or 6 guys that they tried really hard and they just failed out. And in my class we had about 47 people, and I would say it was probably like 35 or so are the ones that graduated from my class. And so it's and it's the first school I've been to where there was that big of an attrition rate. So it was tough, mentally and physically. They ran us during the morning, and then they just picked our brain all day.
Now, once you completed that school, did you become a drill sergeant?
Once you complete that school, you become a drill sergeant, and they say that's when you earn your badge, and then the whole following 2 years is when you see if you get to keep your badge. It was tough, you get frustrated sometimes. Young kids telling you, no, I'm not going to do that. What do? You can't touch them. It's not like the old days, like you say. You lose your temper sometimes, and you're not supposed to use a whole lot of cuss words, but if you got one fault, I suppose that was it the whole time you were there. And a lot of that went out. But all in all, the young people, a lot of them were willing to learn, and they try so hard. And it was the guys that tried hard that you kind of worked with a lot. The ones that didn't care, you figured out how you're going to get rid of. And there weren't very many of those. There were a few. There was about 5 or 6. I was in 2 years, 5 or 6, that we went ahead and, hey, you're not going to cut it. You got to go. But most of them made it. It was fun teaching them things. It was fun getting them into school and getting them down there so they could learn how to be a mechanic. Because basically, I was an advanced individual training drill sergeant. So my job consisted of get them up in the morning, PT them. They do all their physical training, get them to chow, march them to school. You pick them up from school, and then you take them through their common tasks, basic soldier skills, because they had to still keep them up from basic training. So we did that. We did that in the evenings, and we tested them on the weekends. A lot of guys down the street in the basic training, they said, yeah, we're just sidewalk drills, because mostly all we did was march them to school, but we spent more time at work than they did. We had 2 per platoon for drill sergeants. It was about 150 in platoon. And then they had 2 or 3 per platoon, and they had 45 soldiers. So we kind of had to take the extra time. It was a running joke between me and my neighbor who was a basic training drill sergeant. It was like, wait a minute, you're AIT, you're never home. I said, yeah, go figure.
Now, did you become an E7 at that point?
Actually, I had gotten selected for the list to become an E7 while I was there, and then I attended the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officers course. After going to drill sergeant, because most of the leadership things we learned in the drill sergeant school were applied in the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officers course, and it was all open book, so it was a breeze. I spent, quite honestly, a lot of times during school, a lot of guys would be down at the bowling alley, and they were studying because they wanted to go to a place where they could drink a beer, sit back and study. I'd sit back, drink a beer, and bowl a few games while they were studying, because I never opened a book once, and it was all still fresh in my memory, so I just took all the tests. They had a test, it was a 150 question test called the Sergeant Major's test. It was a tough test for most of them, but I had gone through all the same stuff in drill sergeant school. I missed one question. Tried to argue the question because actually there were 2 answers, but the Sergeant Major said, "What, are you crazy?" I said, "Okay, Sergeant Major, you're right, whatever." So I tried to be the only one to ever get 100, but they didn't want me to do that. So I said, okay, whatever.
Okay, and where did you go from there?
From Fort Knox, Kentucky. Well, after I'd gotten promoted, and when I got promoted in the unit, I became the senior drill sergeant for a few short months. And then it was, my drill sergeant time was up in December. And I kept on calling DA and say, hey, I'd like to go back to Germany. So they told me, I think it was in November, okay, you can go to Germany, but you have to be there in January. I said, fine. So I did all my out processing in December. My wife and son and I, we all went to Germany. And I got stationed in Baumholder, Germany. Oh, they call it the Rock. It's just one big hill. And I was stationed in 1/6 Infantry, the sister unit to 2/6 Infantry, would have been in years prior. And I was there, I got there in January, and we deployed to Albania in April for the Kosovo War. And I stayed there for 6 months. I was there for 6 months during the Kosovo War. And our unit, I didn't go. We had actually gone back, but there was one company that was infantry and one company that was armor that actually rolled into Kosovo. That mad dash into Kosovo that the Russians started rolling, and then we had to get one rolling. So they loaded everything up on Hets, the heavy equipment transports, all the tanks and Bradleys, and they rolled into Kosovo. The rest of us just redeployed back to Germany. They followed us about a month or two later. And I figured, well, okay, that's good. That's another 6 months I spent away from my wife and son I didn't expect. And I'm good for a while. 8 months later, I was back in Kosovo for a 6-month tour. And at that time, Baumholder, which it didn't bother me too much because I really didn't like it that much. Well, it might have been just because I spent that much time away. I went to Kosovo, and I was at Monteith Barracks. And I do not remember the main town there. And then I was there for about 4 months, and then the last 2 months I spent in Camp Bonsteel. And I was a force protection NCO at Monteith, which I was in charge of all the security for the entire camp. Answered to the camp commander, which is Lieutenant Colonel. Had to figure out how to force protection, keep everyone safe. All the guard towers, I was in charge of all the guard.
Any major incidents at that point?
No, actually the biggest thing that had happened while I was there is that we thought we had found a bomb, a package which was a bomb outside. The Ukrainians were like over across from us, and so we activated the alert team, and there was 20 of us that were running outside the gate, we had to go find this package and look what was in it. And it actually, we called the EOD guys, and they came up, and it was a suitcase full of shoes, but no one knew. And there was pretty much, that was it. After that, I went there was a colonel who was the Task Force Falcon. He was the assistant commander, and he had known me from Baumholder, and he requested me personally to go take over the brigade motor pool, which I didn't want to do. I just felt like, here I'm a sergeant first class, I'm not going to be your personal mechanic, but in the Army, you have to do what you're told. So Sergeant Major came down one day and said, pack your bags. Sergeant Major, I'm not going anywhere without orders. And he just goes like this. I said, crap. Got in his Humvee and went to Bonsteel, where I spent the last 2 months. Pretty much kind of boring for me because it was running itself, but they just wanted someone there that they were comfortable with. And then I went back to Germany, and they kept on trying to get me to extend because they had found out that they were going to Bosnia the following year. And I said, no, I had a 3-year tour, so I spent a year of it away, and I said, I had enough. I went back to the States, and that's when I went to Fort Carson, Colorado. Fort Carson, Colorado, shortly after arriving, I found out I had made the Master Sergeant list. I had been assigned to the 80A Battery, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. First time I'd ever been in that type of unit, but they had Bradleys, so that's why I went there. I went to the Pinyon Canyon rotation, which is where we train. And while we were out there, the sergeant major from the squadron and the colonel came up and said, hey, we have a job for you. And I said, well, that's an E8 job. I'm just an E7, because I was happy where I was at. And they said, well, we've also got a bit of news for you. You made the promotion list, so you'll get promoted sometime next year, so we're going to move you. I was like, no, just when I was comfortable and having a good time, enjoying myself. So they moved me up there, and they had, we have 42 tanks and 42 Bradleys. 27 tanks were broken, and 23 Bradleys were broken. This is what I went into. And everything in the Army is about readiness, and you have to maintain a 90% or better. We were below 50% on both. 6 months, I worked late every day, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm an E7 and E8, so I shouldn't be working all these hours, but we did. 6 months later, we turned it around. Everything, pretty much, we had 2 or 3 tanks broke, a couple Bradleys broke, and we went to the National Training Center, which was in California. We went there, Fort Irwin, and we trained. And we had trained, and this is the first time they had gone where they had maintained, and while you're out there, things break, but we had maintained above 70% the entire time, which was the first time they'd ever done that. Just, you know, I just tried to keep everybody focused on what they were doing, and it worked, and we did good. And the colonel was happy, so that was good. He was my boss, so I'm happy. Shortly after returning from there, it was time to go, and we'd found out that we were going to go to Iraq. You know, rumors were flowing, and this whole thing was going to happen, and people were like, "Okay, you guys are going to Iraq," and going, "You're not going to Iraq." And, "Yes, you are." And then finally, I think it was December was when the rumors started, and I think it was February finally when they said, "Okay, you have your orders." They issued us the desert camouflage uniforms and the upgraded body armor, and we started loading stuff on the trains. Everything was loaded from Fort Carson, Colorado, and went down to Beaumont, Texas.
And what year was this?
This was 2003. We've gone all the way up to 2003 now. April is when actually we deployed, but February is when we started loading trains. We would have gone earlier, but we had just gotten new Bradley vehicles, and the cavalry scouts, they had to train on the vehicles. And because we were actually attached to 5th Corps in Germany, and they actually wanted us there early. The job that I think it was the 7th, I think it was 2-7 Cav that was over there that led the whole, the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment was actually supposedly supposed to do that mission, but we had to get training, and plus we still had to go from Fort Carson. We loaded everything up, and then for like the last final couple weeks we did training. We learned about the people, we learned about the land, we learned about the country, we learned about pretty much everything we could. Went through what were the rules of engagement, what will we do when we get there, and that was the last 2 weeks. And then probably a couple days before we left, it was pretty much time with the families. It was tough. I'd been to Albania, which, you know, we thought we were going to go in the middle of combat somewhere, but we really didn't. We never physically went into Kosovo, and then I'd gone back to Kosovo. I'd been on patrols in the streets, but it wasn't a combat environment. When we got to Iraq, we didn't know what to expect. Probably before going, the biggest fear was chemicals. That was my biggest fear, and that was a lot of people's biggest fear. We all made sure we had our chemical gear. We made sure we had our masks, and we'd gotten there's a new chemical gear, it was called the J list, and we had gotten issued those just prior to going. And everyone had to go on training. You know, how do you put it on, which is basically the same as the old one, but they wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with what it did. We went to the gas chamber. Everyone went and reshot their weapons to ensure that they were qualified. And most of us who carried 9mm, which was most of the senior NCOs and officers, were issued. They got an extra M16s, so we were all issued M16s also. So we deployed with the 9mm and the M16s. We got to Kuwait, and this was in April. I got there for April, and it was hot already. And we left Colorado, and it was still even before spring, so it hadn't gotten very warm yet. But it was 110 degrees. So the first 3 or 4 days we were in Kuwait, so it was pretty safe. We sat in tents, and pretty much all of us just laid on the ground for like 3 or 4 days. From going from 30 or 40 degree weather to 110 degrees inside of 18, 19, 20 hours is unbelievable.
Did you have a lot of heat casualties?
There were a few. There were minor heat casualties, like a couple people got heat cramps, nothing major. You know, it was like heat cramps or dehydration, and you know, they just forced water on them. A couple guys had to go down and get IVs and stuff, and you drank water, but there was nowhere to cool the water. So you were drinking bath water. That was probably the worst thing about that, was drinking bath water. But I figured out there was tea packets that came in the MREs. Well, if you mixed the tea packet in, it was like drinking tea. So it was a whole lot better than drinking something that was just like that bath water. We stayed there for approximately 2 weeks. We went down to the port. We unloaded vehicles. After unloading vehicles, we moved them to the camp where we were at, which was at Camp Victory. And from Camp Victory, 2 weeks later, we got the word to roll. Most of the ground combat was such a fast move by the Army and the Marines all the way up into Baghdad that by the time we started rolling north, they were there. I mean, pretty much they were in Baghdad. And so we knew pretty much what to expect all the way up, but the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment got the word to roll past Baghdad, and we went northwest. We went all the way out to the Syrian border. And that's where we didn't know what to expect. We knew it all the way up to Baghdad, but everything from Baghdad northwest, we had no clue. So there was some fear there too.
Did you have any situations with landmines or
No,
enemies?
at that point,
contact?
no. At that point, there was no enemy contact. There was no landmines. The only thing we had is we had some suspicious. A lot of and we don't know whether they were terrorists or like local Iraqis. I wasn't sure, but they came a vehicle, a big Iraqi vehicle that had these boxes in the back with mortar rounds in them. And this is way in front of us, up in front of the convoy. They had stopped them and they detained them, so we just kind of rolled by them. But there were 26 people, and there were hundreds and hundreds of mortar rounds. And that was pretty much the biggest thing that had happened on our roll north. We pretty much went all the way into northwest Iraq there were no issues. There were no firefights. There was no, but we didn't know that. Some of the special forces guys had been in and out of there, but they'd never gone as far as the Syrian border. We got all the way to the Syrian border, which was Al-Qaim, and that's where I was in Tiger Squadron then, 1st Squadron. And we'd gotten all the way there, and pretty much it was like a peace stabilization mission because there weren't that many issues with the people. The people were actually, most of them were friendly. The whole drive up north, in fact, north and then northwest, kids had come out and like most of them would wave. Even some of the men, and they'd wave. They seemed very happy. They were elated. That stayed that way for almost like a month or two until finally it was like then things started getting worse. There was a guy, his name was Sergeant Michael Dooley, and he manned a checkpoint where we were at, and this was at Tiger Base. He manned a checkpoint with the tank. His tank was like, say it was right here, and I had a building right here. It was an old rail station, and it had no windows and no doors. We just kind of stayed. I actually slept outside, but we manned a checkpoint up on top of the roof. We had a 50 caliber machine gun, and that was our OP, and his tank kind of sat here. And he was there. I'd gotten to know him over like that 2-month period. You know, I didn't know him before. He was one of the other troops. Well, I'd gotten to know him, and one night somebody came back and they said, "Hey, somebody was shot last night." I'm like, "Okay, are they okay?" And they said, "No, he died." What had happened is 3 Iraqis were in a cab. They get out of the cab. The 2 guys in the back get out of the cab, and one of the guys said he was sick, so he's all hunched over and bent over like he was sick. Dooley went over to him, and he was trying to see if he was okay, and as he bent over to see if he was okay, the other guy had pulled a pistol out, put it to his head, and shot him right in the head, and he pretty much died instantly. The other guys were over there trying to inspect the cab because they had walked forward, and before they could get there, the 2 guys fled on feet, and the driver hopped back in the cab, and he was going to escape. They shot and killed him, but that was the only one they got. That's probably the toughest thing over there. Was you heard about people getting killed, but when you had to go to the memorials, and I mean I'm proud of the national anthem, and it's a great thing, but whenever you hear it now, there was 45 memorials, and that's all you think about. So it's kind of tough. So you just you get by it. You can't listen to taps and not get a tear in your eye.
Did you see a lot of media people there?
No, I didn't see any. There were people that did. They'd ask you questions, and in fact, while I was there, probably the closest I'd gotten to any media was Drew Carey came and visited.
Oh.
He came and visited, and we got to meet him. So I was kind of like a lighter side, which is pretty good.
Was he by himself?
Actually,
Was it a small contingent?
Yeah,
or
it was
a USO show?
It was a USO show. It was Drew Carey, the lady that plays Mimi, the guy that played Farmer Fran from Waterboy. And it was ironic because I'd gotten to talk to him, and him and I, when I was in Korea, I was in the 1-5 infantry. Well, when he was in Vietnam, he was in 1-5 infantry.
Oh.
So we got to talk a little bit. We talked for a good 45 minutes. And I've got a boonie cap at home, which is signed by Drew Carey and everyone that was in the comedy team that went. After I was at Tiger Base for 4 months, and in August, I'd finally gotten promoted to Master Sergeant. And there was a job that opened up for a first sergeant position. And that's when they came down and asked me if I wanted to take that position. And well, I said, of course. And I had to move. I moved from first squadron. I moved to maintenance troop, which is in the support squadron in the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. The job was tough in 2 ways. It was the first time I'd ever gone to a unit that was a support unit. I'm used to being in the line units, and the support unit, kind of in a way, they were like the enemy. You know, you tried to get them to do things, they didn't want to do it. But over there, everyone was, you're in a combat zone. So I learned to deal with it, and actually I found out that it was a bunch of great people. And then the other thing was, this is the first time I'd ever been stationed with females. Learning curve. Wow, I had to learn how to deal with females. At first I didn't know what to do, and everybody was worried because all that I've ever done has been stationed with male soldiers. So everybody's, hey, if you need any help, the colonel was a female. He said, if you need any help, I'll help you. There was an E6 who was the equal opportunity NCO. Just, hey, if you need anything, I says, I think I'll be all right. And I just learned that you treat them like soldiers.
Basically, they do the same job.
They do the same jobs as the males. They're mechanics, they're radio mechanics, they're vehicle mechanics, they're they fix computer. They do the same thing the male soldiers do.
What about living quarters? Were they separate or integrated?
The commander and I, we took over, when I'd gotten to there, I'd moved to Al-Assad Air Base when I had taken that job. And we had taken over Iraqi Air Force barracks. So we got to live in buildings. We had to fix the electricity, we had to fix the lights. There was no air conditioning when we first got there. We still lived on cots, but it was great. We lived in hard buildings. It was a good thing. It was great for the sandstorms. Most of them had windows. And the females, actually, what we did is the commander and I, we'd gone through and we'd ensured that the females, they had their own rooms. We put the females together in rooms and then the males in different rooms. So, and we had female tents and then we had male tents when I was we had support units with us when I was in the Rifles base, so I'd worked around females, but they never worked for me. So, and they were kind of like in their own tent and stuff, in their own separate area. Most of them are okay. I mean, some females work harder than males. Others don't. Some males don't work as hard as other males. It's kind of the same.
Right.
Most of them work fairly well. You have to deal with women work. It's like primarily off of this emotional thing, and that's probably the toughest thing to get used to. And once you get used to that and you put it past, you're okay. You just, hey, you got to go do this because I say so. And 9 times out of 10, same as another soldier, they'll do it. So you learn to deal with that. And then I'd been there for 4 days, and then we had a sergeant, the first sergeant, and a guy that worked in my orderly room was Sergeant Williams, and his wife was in theater. She was over at Camp Anaconda, and he said, hey, First Sergeant, can I go on this convoy? They're going to pick up some parts. I said, sure, you've gone to the safety brief, is your weapon good, the whole thing that you ask, and it's like, everything's good, and I says, does your wife know that you're going to go there? And he says, no, it's going to be a surprise. I'm thinking, wow, that's great. Well, we get word about 3 or 4 hours after the convoy left to Camp Anaconda that one of the convoys had been hit with an improvised explosive device. Sergeant Williams rode in the back of the Humvee. I just talked to him the night before. I'm trying to get to know everyone because I'm new to the unit, and we talked for a little bit. And he's pretty much happy-go-lucky guy, just like, everything is like with a grain of salt, and hey, this will all be over before we know it. Because our big thing is, we got there in April, we're figuring, hey, we're going to be gone by August. We figured that's going to be great. And that was his main philosophy. Hey, So August came and we're still there. He says, oh, don't worry about it, we'll be gone by December. We're still there, but this was August, and we get the word, and I find out that he was in the vehicle, and we didn't know how anybody was. It was a Mr. Strobel, Sergeant Jake, and Sergeant Williams were all in the vehicle. Later on that evening, we found out that Mr. Strobel had been evacuated because the IED had perforated his eardrums, and he had gotten shrapnel all up down his right side. And we had found out at the same time that Sergeant Williams didn't make it. You know, I'd gone through this before, so you figure, you know, it doesn't get easier. You just figure it does. You try and make yourself believe it doesn't. But now I've got this new job. I was the first sergeant of the troop, and they said, hey, you know, we got to go do this memorial ceremony. And you know, the feelings get back in there, and you start thinking about it, and you're saying, but now I've got a part in this thing. So then you have to, they do everything. You know, you go through the ceremony, and then you have to read off this guy's name, and you have to do it 3 times. Probably the toughest thing I've ever done, except for one thing, and that was November before I had left. My stepdad had passed away. He was a Vietnam veteran. He had passed away on Veterans Day. Ironic thing. And I came home for the funeral, and I was in my blues, and we got into the Saratoga Cemetery, and the honor detail there, the lady who was in charge of it, she said, would you like to participate? I said, you know, sure. I said, I think my mom would like that. And she said, well, what would you like to do? I said, I don't know. She said, well, would you like to present the flag to your mother? And I thought to myself, oh, can I do that? You know, and I said, I can do it. It's for her. I can do it. And she said, you know what to do? I said, I know what to do. So it got time to do it, and it was tough. I kept my composure through it somehow. I have no idea how. And when it was over with, you know, my brother's like, hey, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm okay. I'm just going to go thank the detail in the back for their... And I went behind the building, and, you know, and that kind of took my moment, and then I went and thanked him, and I came back. But that was probably the toughest thing I ever did. The second toughest thing I ever did was reading Taft's name. It was rough. And I can be thankful that, I mean, unfortunately, you know, he passed on, but he's in a better place. And that was the only one I had to read the entire time I was over there. And I had 327 people. So out of 327, I only lost 1.
Were any others injured seriously?
Yes. Yeah, we had the most of my injuries were just from that one convoy. Mr. Strobel, who this guy's the funniest guy in the world sometimes. He tells stories about when he was younger and he was boxing, and I can only come to this is personality. So he's talking about this. He's talking about boxing this guy, and he says this guy hit him so hard that it spun the boxing mask, and the only thing he's looking through is this little eye hole. And he's talking about trying to box this guy, and he keeps on getting clocked, and he can't see. But that's him. And I get back to see him because he stayed back in the States. He didn't come back to us. And the way that the system works is that you're supposed to get word on how they're doing. We didn't even know where he was at. So finally one day we get an email from him, and he's like, hey, I'm sitting here enjoying the morphine and hanging out. I can't hear nothing, but I'm doing okay. I mean, that's just him. So finally we get back to the States, and I got to go back early in February because they wanted the first sergeants to do the buildings and make sure everything was good. And the first person that's there that meets us in the center after they release us to our families is Mr. Strobel. And he comes up to me and he says, you know, this guy's thankful for everybody that comes back. And I'm thinking, holy cow, this guy lived through an improvised explosive device in his Humvee, and he's still having operations. They had to, like, they cut his ear and they peel it back and they worked on his eardrum and they put it. And he's showing up at all these ceremonies, every single one. And he shows up with a story for everybody. He says, oh yeah, and he's telling stories about himself with these operations, and he's laughing about them. He's just a heck of a guy. I mean, somebody that I'll never forget in my life.
Let me just ask you this. What about during that period when you were over there, what about contact with family members? Could you have a cell phone, or did you keep
Yeah.
contact through email? Or?
We at first we had to keep contact through letters, which sucked. I mean, it was just, I know it was in the papers, but the mail system was just non-existent. I sent a letter, and my wife got it like 3 months later. And she would, the first things we got were probably April, March, May. Probably May or June is when we first started getting the first trickle of mail, and it was a trickle at first. And that's when all the IEDs and everything had started, the improvised explosive devices. So it was really tough getting convoys all the way. Well, first they had to take it all the way up from Kuwait to Baghdad because the airport wasn't working. And then they had to get it from Baghdad all the way out to where we were on the Syrian border. So you're talking about a half a day's ride at least to get everything out there. And then they had started, first they had the secure internet, which you couldn't send anything to a regular internet address. So it was probably May or so before, May or June before I could even say anything to anybody, how I was, what was going on, and if I was okay. And so that was probably really the toughest thing at first, was just dealing with the fact that you didn't have contact with anybody. We didn't even know what was going on in other areas. I mean, we didn't have a clue. When the IED started, they started talking about it in the briefings and everything, and they started telling us what to do, but you didn't have any sense of what was going on. Finally, they started, there were some local Iraqis who had gone across the Syrian border, and they were buying televisions and satellite dishes because they weren't available in Iraq. That was illegal before with the Saddam Hussein regime. So the squadron bought one, and Fox News, it was like the greatest thing. It was the biggest event that we had in 2 months. They hooked up the satellite dish, and there's Fox News. And I'm sitting there in Iraq, and we'd go up to the briefing room, and that's where they had it. And we'd sit there, if we didn't have anything to do, we'd sit there for hours at a time. At night, we'd stay up late just to watch Fox News. And that was the greatest thing that I had ever seen. I mean, and we flip back like CNN and stuff, but Fox News was just awesome. They had to be the best coverage of it. We're sitting there, and that was where we got our information. You know, we knew what was going on in Baghdad. We knew what was going on in Balad, Anaconda, Fallujah, Armadi. We had people in Armadi. But the 3rd ACR had a third of the country of Iraq. We're a brigade-size element, and we had a third of the country size of Iraq. They said something, I don't know how many square miles. It was crazy, astronomical. We had all the way from west of Baghdad, because we had Armadi, Fallujah. We had all the way down to the Syrian border, and then we had all the way down to the Saudi border, all the way over to the Syrian border, all the way to up north, just below where the Kurds were. And so we had about 7,000 people spread across that whole western part of the country. So we didn't know how everybody was doing on a daily basis, and that's how we found out. We would just see stuff in the news. It was instant news is crazy. It's just crazy. We had an embed reporter. I didn't get to talk to him, but I think his name was John Deutsch. He was with the Gazette in Colorado Springs. He did a lot of articles so that people knew that people were okay. I mean, you know, they would read that, and then after we were there for 2 months, the squadron had set up a web page, and they'd take pictures, and then somehow they'd get them back, whether it was just through mail at first, and then actually they'd do it through email. Once email started, it was great because I would try and make it to get up there every other day to email my wife, which those had to be some of the best days. Even email, it just felt like you were there. You get pictures from home, you get to send pictures, and you know, you're telling her you're all right, but she's like, how do I know? You know, I haven't seen any or heard from you in months. And
you were able to print out the pictures?
Oh, I would know. What I would do is with digital cameras, you go take pictures and then you just put it right on the computer. So she's got instant access. It was great. That's probably the best thing is the digital camera. They're so awesome. You just take and plug the little thing in there, and then you're just putting your pictures straight through the internet home. Technology had to be probably the greatest thing about this war. Technology, just the advances.
What was the food like over there? A lot of MREs?
I wish it was just MREs because the rest of it stunk. I'm a picky eater. I've got to be the world's pickiest eater. I don't like a lot of cooked, like slimy things, you know, like onions and peppers and all that stuff. But a lot of the food they got was like within that theater. You know, they got a lot of it from, like, I don't know whether it was Syria or Jordan or whatever. They got food from there, and They hired Jordanians and everything. Kellogg Brown and Root hires all them people to cook. I just couldn't stand the food. I kept on telling people when packages could get there, send me care packages. I'll take some of that, you know, the meat in a can, and spam. I'll eat spam. I'll eat tuna fish, and ramen noodles. I ate probably ramen noodles for a good part of the time I was over there. I'm just a very picky eater.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather eat an MREs. That they were the tea rations, which are okay, but the food they were cooking in that dining facility, they could have it. I didn't like it. But that's me. I'm a picky eater. A lot of people just like, they'll eat anything, not me. So I probably lost about 10 pounds while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Gained it back since.
Now, what about American civilians working over there? Did you have any contact with them?
A lot of contact with them. They're great people. I mean, I look at it this way. They're getting paid a lot of money, but I don't think there's any amount of money in the world that you could put on to go on them roads. And they spend a lot of the time, like our unit, we're a support unit, so we spent a lot of time on the roads. We would go from one camp to another, 200, 300, 400 miles, and they did that every day too. So just to do that, they're great people, and they were really great. A lot of them are very patriotic, and you know, they care about their country. I know they're making a good paycheck, but they're proud of what we do over there. They're over there without weapons.
Oh, they couldn't carry
No,
weapons?
they can't carry weapons, so they're going on that convoys, and they're relying on us for security. You know, so it's like, going to a combat zone without a weapon? Mm-hmm. That's pretty brave. That's. I don't care how much you get paid. That's an honorable thing to do. They're great people. And they got us everything that we needed too, so that's very honorable too. That's a great, because they started hiring Jordanians and locals, but once the ID started, they couldn't keep them. They're like, forget this, you know. But these truck drivers from the States that come over, work for Kellogg Brown and Root, they drive these trucks for 300-400 miles through IEDs and hit daily. I mean, there was at least one or two a day that I heard of that were coming to us, and how they did it, I don't know, but that's a brave thing to do too.
Now, did they have civilians doing construction work or, you know, building bunkers?
Sure did. They were. Well, since we were at an Air Force base, Saddam was pretty much a paranoid person, so there were plenty of bunkers around where we were at. But they started building fabricated buildings because on the air base they were going to put in a lot of people. So they were doing buildings. They would come in and repair buildings. Most of the Americans that were there were like supervisors for the Jordanians, or they had some from India. They had some from from India, and not too many from Syria, but a lot from Jordan and stuff like that. They would work over there. So a lot of the supervisors were Americans. Mm-hmm. They're pretty good. You know, you get to talk to them. You know, they'd ask you about, hey, what have you heard, or you know, what have I heard, and you know, and I'd ask them what did they hear. So we talked a little bit, and a lot of them were pretty good people. I had one civilian contractor actually who came over with me, and he worked on the tanks. He was from General Dynamics. Randall. Randall's a great guy. He'd been in the Army for 20 years and retired. He'd been retired for a little while. And him and I just used to sit and talk. And most of him he was like kind of a country guy. So he was like, oh, these young guys just don't know nothing and they don't listen. And I said, you know, you and I were there one day too. And he's like, yeah, okay. So we'd sit there and we'd just talk about that, pretty much sometimes to pass the time, you know, because sometimes when there wasn't anything to fix, things got a little bit boring, you know, because you're on this base, you're not going anywhere. It's like being in prison, you know. If there wasn't a mission, you're not going anywhere. You're going to sit there. I'm thankful for it. It kept me safe most of the time. Probably drove a total of 10,000 miles the whole time I was there. And actually, that was the first 3 months I was there. Mm-hmm. Once I became the first sergeant, my job was pretty much daily operations of the troop. I stayed there. We drove into Ramadi one time and Fallujah, and so I got to see a lot of them places. And how lucky I was never to encounter anything is amazing. It's as much as you hear about it now. Mm-hmm. So I feel lucky about that.
So it must have been a great feeling and a great relief to finally get out of there.
Yeah, I've got pictures. I took pictures when we were leaving, because we flew on C-130s right out of Al-Assad Air Base, which I was thankful for, because bittersweet. Here's the problem: you're the first sergeant. You're going back early. You get to get on a plane right where you're at, and fly all the way down to Kuwait. Your troop, 300 plus people, has to drive from there all the way down to Kuwait. So in one token, you're like, God, I get to fly. I don't have to make that 2-day drive, which the drive itself is probably grueling. You know, I remember it coming up. But then you're like, man, and the biggest worry was going down around Fallujah, Baghdad, because there was no other way to go. Coming home, getting on that plane in Kuwait, we flew a military aircraft, so we're all thinking, oh, this is, and it didn't matter. You know, we're going to sit on these little web seats for I don't know how long. We landed in Germany, and we get back on the plane, and the heat goes out. So we have no heat all the way from Germany to Colorado Springs. So first hour, we're all sitting there, we're freezing. There's 93 of us. Every single one of us is freezing. And the crew chief is like, I'm sorry. We're like, well, that ain't going to cut it. So the major who was with us says, you know what, we're getting our sleeping bags out of the bags. Because everything's palletized in the bag. So we started breaking pallets, and everybody's getting out sleeping bags. So every single one of us are in either this sleeping bag, or because they come in 2 pieces now. So guys are breaking theirs apart, giving it to people who didn't have one. And coldest I'd ever been was before we got that sleeping bag. You hop up in a sleeping bag, you're a lot better. And you kind of nod off and go to sleep. I woke up, I think it was above Maine, because we were refueling in the air, because it got kind of bumpy. I woke up, I looked up for a little bit, it was still cold, and I tucked back down in the sleeping bag, things settled down, I went back to sleep. We landed on the ground in Colorado Springs Airport, and it was awesome, because we actually landed, they call it the Jet Center, it's the old airport. We landed on the ground there, and it was just awesome, just to know that you were home, just to know that you were safe, and just to know that you made it in one piece. And at the same time, you take a second to think, not everybody's back yet, and not everybody came back. So you're kind of a little bit sullen there for a little bit, but then you get in there, and as we're walking off the plane, that you get greeted by the people that are back there, and that's wonderful and that's great. But the first thing we get is just this guy, he's a civilian, and he works for one of the local companies, and he took his personal, somebody said upwards of $10,000, and he bought quarter pounders, hundreds of them, and he'd have them right there, and he's handing them out to everybody. He's got a big American flag on his pickup truck, he's got quarter pounders, and he's just, I'm thinking, you're home. It was great. So you get this quarter pounder, then you get on the bus, and you go do your processing, because you got to do processing. And then you go to the Special Events Center. You walk in to, it's that one guy, Toby Keith, American Soldier, and they play that as you're going in, a little short ceremony, and then you get to see
I'm gonna. Okay, you were saying you got your quarter pounder, and you were getting back on the bus.
You get back on the bus, and then after you get off the bus, and you do a processing bit. And after you do your processing, you fill all your paperwork. Then you get back on the bus, and you go to this place called the Special Events Center. You walk in them doors, and they're playing American Soldier by Toby Keith. And man, you get there, and there's all these people, and they're cheering, and it's the greatest feeling in the world. And then when you're done, they release you, and there's your wife and son, and you know you're home.
Now, at that point, how long had it been since you've seen your family?
Oh, April 4th to February 14th, so what, maybe 45 days short of a year? That's a long time, and it was great to see her. And my son, holy cow, I left, he was, I think he had just turned 17, you know, or just before he was 17, because I missed his 17th birthday. And God, he grew up into a fine young man. It was great to see him. Hugged them both. My wife gave me flowers. This is great. And really didn't know what to say. Hugged them and kissed them both, and it was just the happiest person to be back and be there, and happy that they were there, and it was great. I loved it.
How much leave time did they give you?
I didn't take any. My first leave time is right now. I took a 4-day pass. And we stayed at home, and everyone's, they go, okay, you're getting back, and it's going to be tough, you know. Things have changed, and your wife has done a lot of things on her own. Well, she's always been very independent, you know. She's pretty strong-willed. She's German, you know. And there's just things that she does, there's things that I do, and there's things that if she wants to do it, she can do it. I mean, I don't care. Whoever gets done, and we just, that first 4 days as we got back, and it was great, it was wonderful, and it's been like that ever since. We just settle right back in together, you know, and it's a great thing. I've never had a problem. It's just great to be back. It's unbelievable. There's things that you look at that you didn't look at before that you look at now. You're like, man, this is great. Sleeping in a bed, you know, sleeping next to somebody in a bed. Waking up and being able to see my son and my wife in the morning and in the afternoon and the evening, and going to the store, Walmart's, going somewhere at 10 o'clock at night because you want to, calling somebody up on the phone at any time of day or night and be able to get somebody on the other end. It's just a great, driving a car, you know, not having to worry about something blowing up to your left or your right, not having to worry about, we had to change lanes when we went under bridges, and it was like, the big joke was, okay, you're back now, you don't have to do that anymore. If someone follows too closely, you don't have to speed up, and oh yeah, there are speed limits again. Just being home, and the home has a smell. It's great. It's wonderful. It's her. It's my son. And we have 3 dogs, and it's the 3 dogs and the cat, and being there, and knowing that you're there, and knowing that you can go to sleep at night and nothing's gonna happen, and it's you wake up in the morning and it's great, and then you get back in the routine of being here, and you relax a little bit, you take it easy, and you realize that everything you did was worth keeping everything that you have. And it's you realize it, and you're like, wow, this is great. A couple months go by, and my son, he turns 18, and you celebrate his birthday, and it's a great thing. And even before that, he graduates from high school, and thinking, wow, I'm a success. I've something happened tomorrow, I'm a success, and it's just in keeping everything the way it is. It sucked being gone for a year. It sucked being there, but you realize that there was a reason for it, and you love it. You just realize it. You embrace it, and you take life a little easier. Things you take for granted, you appreciate, and it's a great thing. Friends and family, you just realize that you can't replace them, and it's just great to be around them. I don't know, it's crazy too. You find out you have a sister that you never knew about, and that's what I did. I waited to take my leave so I could go meet her. And it's funny, there's things that I would have never done before that I do now. Like, I hadn't seen my father in 23 years. Told my wife, hey, this year I'm going to see my dad. And I did that. And that's great too. I met my sister, and I see my dad, and kind of closed out a whole lot of things that had been lacking for like so long. Come here for a wedding. It's a whole lot of good things, you know. My mom got married again, and it's just wonderful. It's just great. And you realize that these are things that you didn't know if you were going to make it to. You didn't know if you were going to, you didn't even know they existed, some of them. You didn't know what was going to happen. And you get back here and you get to do it, and it's a wonderful thing. I don't think I've been, last couple weeks I've been so happy, and it's wonderful just to be back here.
Now, how much time do you have on your current enlistment?
That's a good question. The Army did this thing a couple years ago, and it's called, for NCOs who are staff sergeant and above over 10 years, we're the same as officers now. We're indefinite. So we go all the way to what they call our retention control point. So they have me until 2008. I've been in for 23 years, so I can submit my retirement paperwork at any time. There's a big debate on whether I want to do that or not. I mean, I love my job. I mean, I love it. I mean, it's a great thing. And I love it for many reasons. I love being with soldiers. I love doing something that means something. And for America now, those people who supported us, and those people that are behind us, the feeling that we get is just so awesome. I can't explain it. There's a fullness that comes from it. Like when you see it on TV, they just totally outweigh anybody who's against anything. Like the people who are for us are like elephants. The people who are against what's going on are like ants. They don't mean anything. And I don't know if they realize that, but they don't mean anything. We marched in a parade on the 5th of June in Colorado Springs. What an honor. And the honor was the little kids on the side of the road as I was going by who would hold out their hands, and you're not supposed to reach out and do that, but you know what? Every single one of them high five and shake their hand, and the guys that were out there that were Vietnam veterans, God bless them. God bless them, because their sacrifices and they're there for everything we have done, and they're there for everything we've come back. They are great Americans, and they're wonderful, and they're there, and so many of them were on that parade route, and I'd see the tears in their eyes, and I'm trying to keep from getting tears in my eyes, and you couldn't help it, and it was a connection. And thank God, I think for them, hopefully this is some closure for them, and it's because there's wonderful people too, and God bless them, and may they have happy lives. And it was just great it's a connection with them, and it's wonderful, and I love it.
Okay, have you joined any veterans organizations?
The Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion. In fact, I'd done the American Legion just prior to having left, because being in Albania and Kosovo. And while I was gone, my membership had lapsed, and there was like 3 or 4 letters, hey, we haven't heard from you. And so I got back and I called the lady up. I said, I've been gone for about a year. And so I went ahead and sent in my stuff. So American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And not having gone to anything, because I did it just prior to leaving. So.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
It's great to be home. Being from New York, it's always great to come back here, and it's just young people. Hey, serving your country is a wonderful thing. You don't have to do it forever, but just doing it is great in some capacity. I love it. I mean, I love my country. I love having served. I love my job. If I could do it forever, I probably would, but we all know that we get older. And I just love being able to give something back to society. And sometimes I look at it and I don't know if it was a lot. I don't know if it was enough, but just a great feeling to know that I did. And hopefully it'll make a difference someday.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and welcome home.
Thank you.